welcome to this panel discussion. We will try to make it as much as possible, very comprehensive and to the point. We will not take much time. Before I'm going to ask the panelists, maybe I will give a brief introduction about the objective. The objective of this panel discussion is, of course, to learn, to understand and shape experience on innovative finance towards transforming and accelerating the way Africa provides capital to its development, to its investment, like the one we have seen before. And then to encourage collaboration and development of actionable strategies among ecosystem actors. When we say ecosystem actors, government, financial institutions, development partners, and the private sector. Bringing all of them together in the ecosystem is very crucial because capital is very key. Without it, we cannot accelerate development and we cannot accelerate investment. So the theme of the panel discussion is transforming capital access, pioneering innovative finance for Africa. I think I have introduced myself. I have very few rules. We will maintain the time 30 to 40 minutes. I will forward questions to the panel members and they will take 3 to 4 minutes each to respond to the questions, and then I will give the chance for the audience to ask questions based on the explanation the panelists will provide, and then they will respond for the questions, and that will be the end of our discussion. Bear with me, let me invite, instead of me introducing them so that I will not distort and underestimate. These are great guys, great entrepreneurs, leaders, so they will introduce themselves. Let me ask Said to briefly introduce himself in 1 minute.
All right, thank you very much. Good afternoon. So my name is Said Abdullah. I'm actually a partner at Grant Johnson, mainly responsible for tax and accounting matters. So I have actually been in this practice for the past 20 years now. So it seems to be I'm very young, but I'm actually having more than 20 years of experience at Grant Johnson and then A.W. Thomas. So our main responsibility is actually mainly doing financial audits, compliance audits and others. And then from tax perspective, we are assisting our clients in terms of tax compliance, and then when investors are actually coming to showcase the Ethiopian requirement and the like. So even for donors that we are actually discussing later as well, in terms of donors as well, donors are actually ready to give financing for various objectives. So during that time, we are actually assisting those donors, whether the recipients are actually really capable enough to accept those funds. One is that. And then the other element is actually to ensure that the funds provided to the grantees are actually spent for the intended purposes. So that's me on a brief, and then we will actually discuss on detail later. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Said. Please join me welcoming Addis. Next is Addis Almayo, Chairman of Kazana. Please introduce yourself and what you are doing in Ethiopia.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Ethiopia. First, I want to say thank you to the Startup Awards for bringing this home. So for everybody on the team, thank you so much to put us on the map. My name is Addis Almayo. I'm the chairman of Kazana Group. We're a local entity that's invested in about 16 startups locally. I'm also a founding partner of the Addis Ababa Angels Network, so a bunch of my friends and I got together and we invested in local startups. I'm also a partner in Kazana Fund, a brand new VC fund that's managed by a partner of mine. Her name is Alina. She's in Dubai right now. We're raising a $10 million fund to invest in Ethiopia and the Horn of Africa region, as well as a bit of East Africa as well.
Thank you. Please again join me. Welcoming Addis. Next is Eric Anderson, Chief investment officer of the GIIG, what you are doing, and I know you are the host for this big event. So tell us briefly about yourself.
Welcome, everyone. I think I can project well enough, or I can try this. This is working. Welcome, everyone, to this event. I am Eric Anderson. I am the Chief Investment Officer of the Gig Africa Fund and a partner in the African Startup Awards. Our approach is summarized by 3 words: find, fund, grow. Find is accomplished through the African Startup Awards. You've heard a lot about it, but the long or the short version is 8,300 contestants boiled down to 72 winners, and we pick a number of investments in the fund part of that statement, which is the Gig Africa Fund. So we are looking for investors who are interested in our selection out of 8,300 contestants across the African continent. The last part of our approach we refer to as GROW. It's a foundation where we provide support services to the best of the companies that we sort through, and the best out of the 8,300. That can take the form of education, direct support, and to be honest, we are a startup. This is our second African Startup Award. We're in our second year for the fund. The foundation it was incorporated this year and it's ready to roll. So the actual grow part of the equation is in its infancy. We're started as well. Thank you.
Thank you. So you have to find him and get a deal with him, and then you will grow, because he said find, grow. That's their motto. Okay, thank you all the panelists for joining this lovely discussion on capital. When we say capital, we don't have to confuse. There are 5 capitals. If you guys are aware, the livelihood development model, 5 capital. One is natural capital. Second is social capital. We all need to have that social capital for whatever investment or anything we do. We need a physical or infrastructure capital. We need a human capital, and we need financial capital. What we are going to discuss today is a financial capital. So we don't have to mix with the rest of capital. Most of the time, when we say capital, what immediately came to our mind is the money, the financial capital. So that's the theme of our discussion. I look forward to this. The first question: what do we mean by innovative finance? Because it's good for the audience here to understand what it is, how different it is from the conventional or traditional financing model. Is Africa or Ethiopia ready for innovative finance? Do we have the right ecosystem? It's a list of questions that I hope you will address.
That's a long list. I think when you're talking about the continent, it differs from region to region. If you look at South Africa and maybe Morocco, possibly Egypt, maybe even Kenya, they have the regulations, the policy, and so forth in place way before we started talking about technology startups and so forth. So they're building on that infrastructure that they've already set, to amplify the startup aspect of it. I think for the rest of the continent, including Ethiopia, we're just beginning that journey. I think 3 years ago, 4 years ago, if you mentioned startup, if you invested in innovation, if you mentioned tech. It was it's a whole new sort of ecosystem for us, both for the private sector, both for the government, as well as the donors that are backing and supporting this type of investment. I think let me speak from my own experience, at least in the Ethiopian context and investing here in startups. Here, traditional banking does not recognize this sector, or I don't blame them, mainly because they make money from the traditional business, from the traditional day-to-day. They're mostly lending based on collateral, and for a vast majority of the startups, that's not a route that they can take. So they have to find unique ways and avenues of raising money, and that's usually startup angel investors like ourselves, family and friends, and for us, we've used that tool of family and friends and that resource, and a vast majority of it is usually Ethiopians that have lived abroad. So for every investment that we personally made, like I was mentioning during the chat earlier, I find a subject matter investor for that startup. So I'll give you an example. We invested in SmilePay, which is a remit to utility payments platform. And to do that, I don't know anything about that space. But I do know someone in the US who's Ethiopian, who's worked in that space for years, and he's started his own startup and sold his own startup twice. So I basically pitched him on behalf of the startup and had him on board as an investor and also an advisor. And that's how they've been able to sort of leapfrog and do what they've done. I think in the Ethiopian context, we have a very, very unique, our own version of securing capital and finance. If you look at Mercato, which is our biggest market in Africa, I don't think any Mercato trader goes to traditional finance to get growth finance. They have what we call ITU, they have what we call IDR. There's traditional ways, and throughout the continent, but specifically in Ethiopia, we tend to support each other. And we tend to sort of use revolve funds to do that. If we can grasp that and sort of build a platform around it, I think there's unique ways and innovative ways of raising money without going outside and begging for it. For us, we did our first investment at Kazana Fund. We invested in last year's winner of the African startup, which is Cubic. It's an young Ethiopian returnee. And we did that through a syndicate. Literally, we reached out to over 150 Ethiopians and non-Ethiopians living abroad, and we said, listen guys, here's an opportunity. Here's a startup that has raised money from traditional VCs. He needs X amount to raise more. Why don't we get together and invest in this? And I think we were the first ones to do that. So when I say that when we work together, anything is possible. Anything is possible, so I'll stop with that.
Great. Thank you, Adis. I think he is in the business. He knows what are the challenges, and actually the reason I asked this question is for us to understand what is it and how different it is from the conventional financing mechanism in Ethiopia. And we heard because he has been in the business. And of course, he has set up, these innovative finance mechanisms in Ethiopia. Maybe I will go to say you can also compliment on that first question. But my next question is, what innovative finance models and instruments are providing effective in attracting capital for African startups and innovations? And how can these models be scaled and replicated? We know Ethiopia and Africa have been dependent on aid, and we have been too much dependent on concessional loans, maybe from developed countries, and yet Africa is struggling. So do we have those mechanisms and models really to attract capital to flow to the continent? Over to you.
All right, thank you. So I think just to complement what Adis was actually saying. So when we assess innovative finance, what does it really mean? So it actually gives a different context from where we are actually assessing. So from the developed world, when we say innovative finance, we are actually mainly assessing inclusive finance. Because the main focus of financing is, or any investor, as a rational investor, they are actually trying to make money. So that's actually their main target. So for any company who's actually trying to get an investment, the prime criteria of investment is actually whether the business will actually make adequate profit in the short period of time. So from that perspective, when we say innovative or inclusive, we are actually trying to highlight the impact financing, social capital, CDFIs, and then other alternatives. But when it comes to Ethiopia and then most of African region, so most of the investment alternatives are not actually yet ready. So when we are actually evaluating startups, they are actually really struggling. They might have a very good idea, wonderful idea, and then it's actually properly timed. So I think timing is actually one of the areas where most businesses are actually going to be successful. So even from the idea, timing is actually really important. So you might have an idea, you might have a right timing, but having a finance is actually really a challenge. So on that aspect, when we say an innovative finance from our perspective, we are actually saying angel finance. We are also trying to consider venture capitals and then other investors as well. So there are also currently now NGOs and then multilateral organizations who are actually trying to finance businesses, not actually in the aim of making profit, but rather to contribute to the social impact and then also the climate and other issues of businesses. So from that perspective, what I'm actually seeing is that's actually getting a traction, especially from the developed worlds. They are actually now trying to see Africa as a potential market, and then we are actually seeing a lot of investors and then also from donor agents and multilateral organizations. They are actually trying to see Ethiopia, Africa, and then Ethiopia in particular, as a potential for their investments. So from that perspective, I'm actually seeing traction, but in terms of readiness of the startups, are they actually really ready to be financed by venture capitals or by angel investors? That's actually really a challenge. Because we as Grant Thornton, we are actually trying to assist a lot of investment companies when they are actually trying to do due diligence and other issues. So the major challenge that we are always observing is readiness from the startup is actually one of the challenges, because they are not actually really understanding the requirement of those investors. The investors are actually looking for something, while we are not actually ready for that, then the investors will not actually be willing to finance those ideas. So that's actually the challenge that needs to be properly addressed. In terms of readiness from a government and other regulatory perspective, that's also one of the challenges, especially I'm talking from the Ethiopian perspective. So we don't actually have that much readiness in terms of regulatory activity to accept investment from venture capitals or from angel finances and then others. So the main challenge is anyone who is actually trying to invest is actually having an objective, and then will actually invest for 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, depending on their portfolio, and then to exit. But exiting the Ethiopian market is actually really challenging. And then from a regulatory perspective as well, that's actually one area where we need to properly address that. Because when I say exiting, there are actually various challenges, various hurdles. We can actually name the foreign currency challenges. So there might be an investor who is actually willing to invest to very good startup in Ethiopia. So they might be willing, and then they can actually invest in foreign currency. But getting that foreign currency back while the business is actually making money is actually really challenging, and that's actually one challenge that needs to be considered. The other element is actually in terms of taxation as well. So whenever any company is actually investing, then that taxation is also one of the challenges where we are actually seeing many companies are actually really struggling. So they are actually now trying to develop a lot of financing arrangements where they are actually setting up companies in tax havens like in the PVI, Jersey, Netherlands, and others. And then those companies are actually owing the investment vehicles and then investing that. So that then they are actually trying to avoid any challenges from tax perspective. So that's actually my intake for your question, and I will actually back with other supplements as well.
Thank you, Syed. I think that's very enlightening. I think the readiness, most of the time, startups, we expect the money to come and be given as a grant. No, that's not how it works. We need to be ready for that. I think I'm a witness for that. We are setting up the Innovative Finance Lab together with the National Bank of Ethiopia. And this year we were selecting 100 growth-oriented SMEs to be ready and eligible to access finance. And for your surprise, in Ethiopia, in a country with 120 million population and maybe more than 2 million MSMEs, of course most of them are micro, we didn't find those investment-ready startups and SMEs. So that's something maybe the government and all the stakeholders need to work on the ecosystem, making them ready. It's not only availing finance, but making the startups ready is something very critical, which I fully agree with that. Thank you. I will go to Nathaniel. How can government, you have been in this business and you know the challenges, and how can government, financial institutions and donor organization or development organization collaborate to create a conducive environment for mobilizing capital and deployment in order to align the needs of this emerging innovation ecosystem, maybe based on your experience.
I want to say thank you very much for this opportunity. I didn't get the chance to brief myself. My name is Nathaniel Abraham. I'm the co-founder and CEO of McFair Financial Technology. Our company have been involved in different sectors. At core, we are a fintech company. We started developing a data over sound technology at first, and we pivoted to helping merchants because we saw the timing and the product that delivered at first was not suited for the Ethiopian market at first, so that we pivoted to the financial management for merchants, for which merchants needed to expand their businesses. So at the core, what we do is that we utilize the merchant data to give them ideally access to finance. So as the start, we provide them a cash book management system, then a staff management system, inventory management system, and that they can expand their business and grow at general. To come to the question, I think what we have to focus what we have to we have the key problem, I think, that the government, the donors and the financial institution have to solve is that we can talk about the tax intensive, we can talk about risk-taking from the financial institution, and also we can talk about like this kind of events for startups. But the key problem I think we have to focus on is data. We don't actually have a concrete and available data about the startup, about the ecosystem. We don't have actually the government and the donors and the private sector have to involve in research, mainly focusing on we don't have a concrete data about the population size, the literacy rate, the education level, and the household income. So we have to mainly focus about doing a research, so that the startup and the investor could invest. So the startup could utilize this information, this data, to make informed decision about their target market. And the investors also, they can utilize this research, this information to invest in startup. So that I think the donors, the government, and also the fintech, the financial institution have to really, really work on developing a research and giving this document available for the startup and also for investors. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you. I think the data issue is very critical. Unfortunately, we don't have a credit history in this country. So without having a proper data, not only research and analysis from the financial side, the history, the performance of the startups in the SMEs or businesses is very crucial to attract, capital investors. to this country. So financial institutions need to experience that in the future. Maybe related to that, I will go back to Said. Do we have a matrix, because this is very critical and the criteria that are essential for evaluating the impact of capital investment in Africa, in Ethiopia, so that investors would rely and make a decision, an informed decision to invest, assuming that will accelerate long-term growth. What are the barriers there?
All right. Thank you very much. So maybe just to complement on the first question, the earlier question that you are actually raising. So the collaboration that's actually required between government and then non-development organizations, or maybe NGOs or multilateral organizations. So as I said earlier, there is actually a huge funding or a huge shift in terms of the developing world, or in terms of these multinational organizations to focus on various social impact areas, including climate change, diversity, and others. So one issue that I'm actually trying to stress in here is normally government should actually work in hand with these development organizations or these multilateral organizations to identify opportunities that can actually be tapped in, so that then this startup can actually get adequate finance. Because what we see clearly as a challenge is those startups are actually really in need of finance at their initial stage of investment. And then what government is actually trying to do in terms of the incentives or regulations, they were actually trying to give tax incentives or some sort of incentives, but on the profit that these companies are actually generating. So when we see the direction or the area that the government is trying to subsidize, and then what the startups are actually looking is completely different. What startups are actually looking is an immediate finance to start a business. But what government is actually trying to do from a policy framework is to provide incentives for companies once they are actually making a profit. So that actually clearly needs some sort of intervention. And then when we see that, I think these multilateral or these NGOs are actually coming to picture. So they are actually willing, so far from the Ethiopian perspective, they are actually willing to provide technical assistance and another support to these startups. So just to make them more successful, then I think we might actually need to rethink our strategy or our approach, so that then the requirement of the startups and then also the engagement of those multilateral organizations and government are actually aligned. So that's actually the point that I would like to make. So in terms of the second question that you are actually raising, in terms of the matrix that we can actually assess the impact of businesses. So we are actually having a different dilemma in here as well. So when we say matrix, I think the common matrix that's actually always available is whether that business is actually making money. So this discounted cash flows approach or the ratio analysis are actually the ones which are actually mainly common in our assessment. So when we do our consultancy for potential investors, we are actually always focusing on EBITDA margins, and then multiple of EBITDA is actually the criteria where we are actually evaluating businesses. And then that's also the area where investors are actually assessing businesses. But when it comes to startups, as I discussed earlier, normally the real challenge is those startups do not actually have anything to prove, because they are just actually starting their business. So we cannot actually assess their performance. So the main aim of our evaluation when we are actually assessing startups is whether the idea is actually having value. So that's actually clearly subjective because we are assessing value. So even an investor, they are actually, the real challenge for startups of getting money is because all investor is actually having some understanding or some expectation while they are actually assessing startups. So unless you are actually meeting those standards, then getting finance from them is actually going to be challenging. So for that, then the alternative evaluations are just developing milestones. So for a startup, when we evaluate startups, then there should be clear milestones, then identifying different areas where that startup should actually be evaluated, rather than actually concentrating only on a finance matrix. And then the other element is normally evaluating the social impact of those investors is also something that needs to be assessed. And then the other element is also assessing the implication of those startups on the various policy or the various objectives that the government or these multilateral organizations are actually targeting. So a different perspective needs to be done rather than only focusing on the profit-oriented evaluation of the investors.
Thank you. You have to join me and appreciate the colleagues. I know it's lunchtime. We are running out of time, but we are almost through. There is, thank you, I think, Said, you have mentioned a very good point. There need to be a mechanism to support startups at the early stage. I think the Ethiopian government has well recognized that. Thank you for the lead, Ministry of Innovation, Ministry of Labor and Skills, the Entrepreneurship Development Institute, Dr. Hassan Salami, and all of them are here. I think Ethiopia has set up an initiative called NEST to support the next generation startups. As Said said, it's not only after they do business, even at the early stage they need to get that incentive and support, and that's why Ethiopia is now setting up this initiative called the NEST, and you have to explore and use that opportunity, which will be a good mechanism to move to the next level. Eric, sorry for keeping you at the last. What are really the opportunities and the potentials that you see in Africa, and what needs to be done in the future to attract investors? It could be from the developed countries or to mobilize capital internally.
I like to look at this issue from the supply side, the supply of startups. What I've noticed through my experience with the African Startup Awards and in the last day and a half is there are really amazing startups. And so capital demands return. If the startups are offering superior return based on great ideas, great people, and I think everyone on this panel agreed, support for the entrepreneurs. In the end, capital will respond to those opportunities. So I see this from the supply side, the supply of startups. We need to showcase and expose the startups and the entrepreneurs in this market and support them so that their ideas and their way of presenting and their understanding of how to obtain financing makes sense to investors. I think I'm going to leave it there. I know we're short on time. I basically said what I wanted to, so thank you for that opportunity.
Okay, thank you, Eric. I think that's a very good point. Thank you. We need to match the demand and the supply. We know there is a huge gap in Ethiopia. I think last year we have done a study, UNDP, SMEs only, they have a financial gap of $6 billion. That's very huge. That's a great opportunity for capital investors to come and invest as far as the conducive environment is there. So that gap itself is an opportunity if we say it like that. So I think that's something we need to capitalize. Before we conclude, let me give the chance to Adis on this last point on the potential challenges and also what needs to be done in the future.
I think the biggest challenge is lack of positive sort of exits on the continent. I think there's been a very few, I think $1 or $2 billion exits that have come out of Nigeria, maybe Morocco. The biggest challenge is essentially we compare African startups to global startups. And we compare, African success with global success. And that's a challenge. Because I think we should sort of not diminish the success that is expected from African entrepreneurs, but we should also understand that the challenges and the returns on the continent are going to be much less than you would find in the Silicon Valley. So that's one perception. In terms of the opportunity, I feel like what's happened since COVID and sort of the freezing, if I may say, of VC funding on the continent and globally has made a lot of African startups become much more entrepreneurial in terms of how they secure funding and how they manage the money that comes to them. The days of endless sort of runway cash is, I think, forever gone. I think for a lot of startups now, you need to break even. It's about running a business rather than running a deck, right? So I think that reality is finally sunk in. And the Ethiopian context, we don't have that luxury of VCs, giving us runways for 2 years, 3 years to expand and so forth. We need to break even within the first 6 months. Every single startup we have needs to break even and be able to handle themselves, because once you're an angel investor, there's no seed 1 round, 2nd round, 3rd round. We don't have that luxury. So for every single investment that we've made, we made sure that the return on investment, at least the break-even point, needs to be as quickly as possible. So I think I'm very positive, especially about Ethiopia, because like everything else, we do everything last in this country. So we take the best of what the world has done, and we get to pick and choose what we want to do and localize it for our own sort of reality. And I think with a population of 120 million, and these kids, I'm telling you, they're just the most amazing, smart, innovative kids you would ever find on this earth. You'll find them in this country, in every sector. I'm amazed every day. Every day. And I spent, sorry if I like going on, but I spend literally 45 minutes a day just scouting LinkedIn, looking for just amazing young kids. And the other day I found a kid who's going to Dahlberg. Is it Dahlberg? One of the top schools in the US. He's like 23, 24. He's taking AI, he's doing PhD in AI, an Ethiopian kid. PhD in AI, and I looked at his background, I was blown away. I begged him, please call me, please call me, please call me. And he called me, and we talked, and I posted about him. And then his father replied and said, oh, you don't know the other kids. And he posted all the other kids. One is a doctor, one is a lawyer, one. I was like, how the hell did you raise this kid? So we're having lunch next week so he can give me advice on how to raise amazing kids. But this is just amazing time.
Thank you. That's a great story. I wish we would have more time, and unfortunately, lunchtime is approaching. When you are hungry, it's very difficult to keep you long. So we will not receive questions from the audience. We will conclude from here. Please join me to thank all the panelists for their very excellent deliberations. We know Africa need to do a lot more of this. We are just starting. We are on the right path. But compared to the rest of the world, we are, we have to do a lot more. Israel has 6,000 startups. Ethiopia has maybe some 100 startups. So you can imagine the difference and how much we need to do more in terms of improving the ecosystem, in terms of availing capital, and also in terms of improving the regulatory policy environment for the startups to operate. Thank you very much. Have a great afternoon and enjoy your lunch. Thank you very much.